Is Social Security the working Americans' retirement guarantee, providing economic security for millions of Americans, including seniors, people with disabilities, and children and spouses who have lost a provider? Does the program need enhancements so that no one who has worked their whole lives retires into poverty? To answer some of these questions and dive deep into discussions about the importance of Social Security reform now is Congressman Larson, representing Connecticut's 1st District and chairman of the National Subcommittee on Social Security. Welcome, Congressman Larson.
Great to be here.
You represent Connecticut's 1st Congressional District, which includes Hartford counties, Litchfield, Middlesex counties, like 27 towns. You have quite an interesting district, the way it's
done in the shape of a crab, I think.
Okay.
But, all because of what happened when Connecticut lost a congressional seat, and we had to divide the 6th District, that Chris Murphy held at the time, but prior to him, Nancy Johnson. And so having the district takes a look with Hartford, East Hartford, West Hartford, Manchester, and Windsor, and Bloomfield, and Wethersfield, and Newington in the center. Then it branches out like two arms of a crab and goes all the way down through Berlin, over to Southington and Bristol, and then all the way up through Granby, East Granby, and into New Hartford, and a part of Torrington at the very end, including Colebrook as well.
And in Washington, you sit on the very prestigious Ways and Means Committee.
Correct.
And part of that committee has subcommittees, and one of them is the Social Security Committee, and you are the chair of that committee.
That's right. I mean, the Social Security chair is a very important chair on the Ways and Means Committee, primarily because it affects every single American. And it is the nation's #1 insurance plan and the nation's #1 anti-poverty plan. Without Social Security, 90% of our seniors will be living in poverty. So that's 90% of 62 million people is a pretty amazing statistic.
And we're going to kind of dive deep into some of those numbers, but I noticed in my research that your committee also does some oversight with the Social Security Administration.
Yes.
For example, some monies weren't taken out of Social Security to pay for Medicare, and your committee was responsible for going back and asking for answers to those kinds of things.
Exactly. So yes, it's our responsibility to do oversight and review, especially of the Social Security system, because the one thing we want to make all viewers, whether it's Nutmeg TV or people that listen by radio, is to be aware of the kind of fraud and the traps that exist out there, and then even some of the unintended mistakes, as what happened in terms of deductions and Medicare. So we have oversight and review responsibility as well.
Now, the acting commissioner is Nancy Berryhill, who's a 40-year veteran. I had no idea. She was in different positions at the Social Security Administration, so she's seen a lot of key positions, and now she is the acting commissioner, and they have a $12 billion budget. She has 64,000 employees that serve in offices all over, and another 16,000 state employees who look at those who are applying for benefits. And the administration issues $960 billion in payments to nearly 66 million people. So when we're talking about Social Security today, 66 million people is a lot of American citizens.
That is a lot of American citizens, and it's just not the elderly, because as you know, Social Security also covers spouses and dependents and provides disability insurance as well. And so our goal in introducing Social Security 2100 is to combine all of them. Over the years, starting out as the old age and retirement and disabilities, actually Social Security started during the Roosevelt era as part of an unemployment initiative as well after the Great Depression. But it is the nation's #1 insurance program and #1 anti-poverty program, because how it keeps so many of our seniors off of the poverty rolls. Having said that, there's still 5 million who have paid in their quarters, have worked all their lives, who find themselves living in poverty. And unfortunately, more than 3 million of them are women. And primarily because women are the caregivers in our society. They had the time was needed to raise a family and to be at home, and usually it falls upon women also to take care of the sick when they're ill. And when you add that with pay inequity and see that for every dollar the male counterpart was making, women were making 80 cents. And if you're a black female, it was 56 cents. And if you're a Hispanic female, it was 43 cents. So we're out to correct that as well, that anomaly within the system.
Now you brought up President Roosevelt, so let's talk about 1935 is when the plan was originally implemented. And I know that the benefits for Social Security are vital. Let's talk about a few of those vital benefits. The American people, even during the 2016 presidential election, which were divided in who they wanted to pick as their president, were not divided in how important Social Security was to the American people. So the American people are on board with this. And so we thank you for championing your efforts for the American people. AARP pointed out that those between 50 and 64 are very concerned about their financial futures. And one statistic, which I couldn't believe, was an average of 10,000 baby boomers per day are coming into the system.
Exactly.
So these are vital benefits. And what were the problems? What are the problems that currently exist?
Well, the last time Congress, who is responsible actuarially to make sure that the system is sound and is running and does what the law intended it to do, was in 1983. Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House. Ronald Reagan was the President. Most people don't realize, but Howard Baker, at the time a Republican, controlled the Senate. So it's the same setup actually today when you have Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker, a Democrat, to Tip O'Neill's Democratic reign in '83. Ronald Reagan was the President. In his place we have Donald Trump. In Howard Baker, we have Mitch McConnell. So when people say, oh, how's this going to pass? How are you going to get a bill through when you have a Republican president and you have a Republican-controlled Senate? Well, the truth of the matter is that President Trump actually quite remarkably stood up during a campaign and said, Social Security is not an entitlement. And if people in your viewing audience get nothing out of this interview, they should know that Social Security is not an entitlement. It's the insurance that they pay for. And this is easily verifiable just by looking at your pay stub where it says FICA. FICA stands for Federal Insurance Contribution, not federal entitlement, but the money that people have actually been putting aside all of their lives. And yet, even with that, not keeping pace since 1983, meaning the Congress back then did not index appropriately the need for things to go up gradually over time. As I say to every audience I'm in front of, think back. Have any of your insurance premiums gone up since 1983? And the answer is, of course they have, because you have to make the actuarial adjustment unless you have indexed that from the start to make the gradual increases. Now, we index the age, and currently you can retire at age 66 now, but by 2022, depending upon when you were born, that will raise again to 67. And there are some that say, well, the easy solution is since we're living longer, we should just raise the age. Not so, because we've already raised the age back in 1983, and people are seeing the impacts of that. And to raise the age by a year means a 7% a reduction in your benefit. And that's why it's so vitally important.
Now, you mentioned actuarial, and I read the hearing, and Stephen Goss, who's the Social Security Administration's chief actuary, did say that at the time of 1982, when they did the actuarial projections, they were seeing the slow build, which they wanted to do, but they knew there would be a rapid decline. So this was something that under your plan, he has stated that there would actually be a surplus at the end of it that could be invested. Did you have something actuarially that you wanted to mention in your report?
Well, first of all, I think that's a very important point, and I carry this with me. I take two props everywhere I go. The most important one is the actuary's report. Why is that important? Because he's an independent actuary charged with the sole responsibility to make sure the Social Security system is sustainably solvent. Now, that's the law. Now, the law dictates that Social Security, what they mean by sustainably solvent is that it's solvent beyond 75 years.
Right.
So our bill is the only bill in Congress that is not only sustainable beyond 75 years, but enhances the program. Because we institute what Congress failed to do way back when. We increased the contribution by 1%. But we phased that in over 25 years. So that if you're making $50,000 a year, it would actually cost you 50 cents a week to make sure that Social Security remains solvent beyond 75 years. Therefore, we call it Social Security 2100, as it will take us into the next century. But also, we've enhanced it. We give a 2% across the board increase. We make sure that no one can retire into poverty.
Right.
And so the new floor for Social Security becomes 125% of what the federal government determines the poverty rate is. We have a COLA that actually reflects what the elderly incur as expenses in everything from doctor visits to prescriptions to nutrition to physical therapy to heating and cooling your homes and providing yourself with basic sustenance. And that's what people spend money on.
It is, and how the expenses change for the working and the retired are different. And we're going to get into each level of the bill, but just to give the folks at home a number here, Chief Actuary Goss had said that the estimated $13.2 trillion budget deficit between 2034 and 2092 under this bill would be replaced by a $2.1 trillion surplus.
That's right.
And so that's a $15.3 trillion swing, which is enormous. Let's talk about, before we get into the nuts and bolts of the bill, Congress had a responsibility, and why were no protections or voted increases in benefits happened for Social Security over a half of a century?
Primarily because there's been a change in attitude and a philosophical divide that we're out to breach, and that is there are some dating back to the inception of Social Security that said this is government, this is socialism, this is government creep into taking over part of your life. Well, what Roosevelt recognized and what subsequent presidents, including Republicans and Democrats, have realized, that in our entrepreneurial society, in our capitalistic society, we need to make sure, as much as we want to encourage free enterprise, that free enterprise oftentimes doesn't come without a cost. And people who work within that system can end up, through no fault of their own, being the victims of that system. Well, what do we have in recent data to support that? Well, we only have to go back as far as 2008 and see that for many Americans during the Great Recession, their 401k became a 101k. In fact, the truth is, and the Fed just came out with a report that shows that 90% of all Americans since 2008, 90% have not recovered their wealth and assets that they lost. During that same time period, Social Security never missed a payment.
No, they didn't.
And that's why it's the fail-safe system, why it's the premier insurance system and anti-poverty. And even with that, as we pointed out earlier, there are about 5 million people that are living in poverty, having paid all of their quarters in, which is why we seek to make the new level, the new floor, 125%. And this affects women more so than it affects men.
So we're going to get into the proposed legislation, which was first introduced in 2014, then reintroduced again in 2017. But the bill on reform died quickly because most likely due to the control of the House at the time?
Well, it didn't die. It just never got heard. Mm-hmm. And so, unfortunately, during the 8-year reign of the Republican majority, and not as though like-minded Republicans wanted to see the kind of reform and change that we're advocating in this bill, but the leadership said, this is a tax and we're against taxes. Now, at the same time that we're talking about 90% of the American people not having recovered their wealth and assets, we just passed in 2017 a $2 trillion tax cut that's unpaid for, 83% of which goes to the nation's wealthiest 1%. That's the same 10%, by the way, who have recovered nicely from the Great Recession. Mm-hmm. What that points out is to the vicissitudes of a system that can leave some, through no fault of their own, out in the cold. Mm-hmm. How do you prevent that? That's what makes Roosevelt's vision so grand. And even someone like Dwight David Eisenhower in the 50s, having come back and been a conservative who campaigned against expansive government, ended up expanding Social Security because he knew what those GIs who he had oversaw and was the leader of during the Second World War and marshaled this June will be the 75th anniversary of the D-Day invasion. But I marvel at what Eisenhower came to understand and grasp and realize, that in this kind of a political system and in this kind of a capitalistic economy, you're going to need this safety net to take care of people. Mm-hmm. And so he expanded it.
Now, before we did the show, I'd mentioned to you that I had read the hearing, and I was very interested in how well you were working with the Republicans that were also at the hearing, and yes, how they were speaking about the importance of the Social Security plan, and that it appeared to be in that hearing, that one hearing that I had read, that there was really some work going on with both sides.
Well, there is. And Tom Reed,
yes,
who is the ranking Republican on the committee, he lost his father. He was raised on Social yes, Security. Mm-hmm. Tom Rice from South Carolina, who's also on the committee, lost his father, and he was raised on Social Security. Rich Neal, the chairman of the committee, who's from Springfield, Massachusetts, lost his mother and father and raised by his grandmother, who then passed, and his aunt. Mm-hmm. So people understand mm-hmm, the value of Social Security, and we've had to overcome two things. And number one, first, was getting people away from the notion that this is an entitlement. Mm-hmm. It is not an entitlement, as we stated earlier, and easily figured out by looking at your pay stub. And also, the next thing is that, we'll be unfairly burdening another generation. And that's not true either. In fact, millennials are probably going to need Social Security more than those baby boomers, as you pointed out, 10,000 a day who become eligible for Social Security. But millennials are finding it probably the only generation that will not make as much money as their parents have made, find themselves with an unprecedented amount of student loan debt that is hanging over their heads, unprecedented time in which they're trying to get a mortgage right, where they don't have the money that's available. Part of what is commonly referred to as the gig economy. And within that context, We're saying, well, find the money to put aside so that you can better benefit yourself. And so about 90% of them have no savings because they're making do to try to get that mortgage payment, pay off their student loan debts, and are working in many cases like people of my generation who had a defined benefit package, who have pensions or invested in a 401k. And all the more reason why Social Security has to be there for them.
Right, corporately, you know, the company pension plans are becoming a thing of the past.
Exactly.
So the new workforce isn't even experiencing that. We do have a panel of folks who are going to join us in a couple of minutes, but let's just break down the bill quickly, and then we can get into a little bit more. The first thing is you're going to increase benefits across the board.
Correct.
What does that mean?
That means that everybody's going to get a 2% increase in their Social Security. Now, nobody's getting wealthy on Social Security, and I should have pointed out from the outset, the average amount of money that is received by a male is $18,000. The average amount of money by a woman is $14,000. Think about that in the state of Connecticut, and surviving on $18,000 or $14,000 as your only source of income. And there are people, and again, most notably women, who are living far below that. I spoke to a lady in Wethersfield who's living on Social Security only, and her check is $9,000. So that 2% across the board will bring people slightly up, but then the 125% of poverty will make sure that none of the people, the 5 million that are currently impoverished, and in the future people won't retire. Now and all that money, as economists will point out, goes right back into our economy.
Right. They have
it's
a bit more spending
power. It's not as though people are hoarding their Social Security benefits. They're spending it on the essentials of life.
Yes. Now, the inflation switch to the CPIE, which now it's the CPIW, which is the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers. Now, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I thought this was very interesting, has looked at the method of what a working person spends money on and what a retiree spends money on. And obviously, health care, physical therapy, and housing are going up, and transportation, not going back and forth to work, and other expenses are going down. So they looked at all of the statistics. They used households 62 and over, and they realized that the method wasn't working. So your new protection against this inflation, when compared side by side, is going to be another benefit. Yes,
and so this is something the AARP has been pushing for a number of years. And you may recall there was also an effort by the Simpson-Bowles Commission to institute chain CPI. The effort here was to try to contain the CPI, standing for the Consumer Price Index. And there have been many times where an elderly population on fixed income gets no COLA. So we wanted to have a COLA that actually reflects the actual cost that a person will experience in retirement. And what are those? Doctor visits, nutrition, physical therapy, prescription drugs, heating and cooling your home, basically the essentials in life. And as they rise, and clearly they have, that there's an adjustment that's been made. So again, we're not impoverishing the people. And I always like to point out, and where does that money go? Right back into the economy.
To the economy.
You ask any Chamber of Commerce and say, what could you, there's on average about 125,000 people per congressional district, of which there are 435, who are on Social Security, some more, some less, but on average about 125,000. Imagine taking 125,000 people who receive Social Security benefits and cut those benefits and not have that money going into the economy. That's why this is so important for economic development. Too.
Vital. Protect low-income workers, so you want to increase the minimum benefit, which eroded since its enactment in '72. So there's a big change here. The base right now, the minimum, is $872.50 for those who worked for 30 years. The new minimum would be that 125% that you were just talking about.
Exactly. As determined by the federal government. And so the various government agencies who are responsible, would say, here's what we determine is the 25% essentially above what the poverty rate is. And therefore, that's what people would receive. This is vitally important to women, and increasingly so, and especially with women more in the workforce now than they've ever been.
Right.
But last time I checked, they're still giving birth and staying home with children and raising families and are the primary caregivers, as well as there has not been pay equity along the way.
Right.
So we think this is another equalizer.
You want to cut the Social Security taxes. The numbers haven't been modified since 1983. And so for married filing jointly, there's no tax if the short-term income or interim income is less than $32,000. So if the temporary income is less than $100,000, there's no taxes on benefits, and you want to cut those Social Security taxes.
Exactly. Here's, we say to our Republicans on the other side, why are you against a tax cut? And in essence, what should have happened in '83 is they should have indexed that so that it kept pace with the changes that have taken place in society. Again, they didn't do it. So, as you point out, if you're single and making more than $24,000, you're taxed. A married couple making more than $32,000, you're taxed. So, and for a lot of people, they want to continue working beyond their retirement age out of necessity or out of a purposeful, meaningful life because they want to be committed and involved.
Exactly.
So should we tax these benefits?
Right.
So what we've done is said, no, let's raise that to $50,000, then index it per individual, and $100,000 per married couple, and index them. 12 million Americans will get an automatic tax break.
Right, and so many want to remain doing something.
Exactly.
It's key to our health, emotional and physical health.
That's a great point, it is.
So let's talk about the increase to the maximum wage base. So currently the taxes are in the first $132,000 of earnings, nothing over that. The new law, the income would be $400,000. So that's when the FICA tax would kick back in. So, right. that's...
Well, let me explain how this works, because when we first introduced the bill 6 years ago, it was the cap on contributions was $112,000. Today, it's $132,900. Every year, it will increase as we go up. But what we did is lift the cap, as it's called, on income over $400,000. And this is the time when I usually ask my audiences, how many of you are making over $400,000? It's about 0.6% of the American public that do. And so, and all that says is that you will be paying proportionately the same amount that a person making $50,000 is. And meanwhile, that donut hole that exists out there each year, so that by 2054, it will reach 400,000. So each year, that's going to continue to go up, but it creates a donut hole, which impacts a lot of working middle-class people.
Absolutely.
In high-earning places. So that's why we created the cap. And then, of course, we also have a direct contribution that everybody makes, and that's what Roosevelt intended.
Now, the increase to payroll taxes, it would be a gradual increase.
Correct.
0.05% per year, increasing. So by 2041, both employers and employees would each pay 7.4%. So it would be a very, very slow rise. And you had said 50 cents when you were talking about, I think, a $50,000 a year annual salary to keep this system going.
This is where I always bring out my Starbucks. And every time I travel to a senior center, I bring one of these, and I ask them, how much do they think this costs? And they know, and they say, is it a latte? And I go, yes. They go, $4.50. Or if you were making $50,000 a year, this is 9 weeks of Social Security payments. And for that poor person making $400,000 a year, costs more to buy this latte than it will to fix Social Security. And that's the concept I want to leave in people's minds, that by increasing the contribution 1% by the employer, 1% by the individual. Now the employer gets to write that off as for taxes. So it's not a direct cost to the employer. And the citizen, of course, gets the enhanced benefit, and not just the pension, but as we mentioned earlier, disability, spousal, and dependent coverage, which are vitally important. 1 in 5 Americans receive Social Security payments that are not seniors. Their children and their spouses very much in need of what this program offers.
And Congressman Larson is definitely championing this effort, and we're going to meet some folks in your community when we come back.
Community TV, your neighborhood TV.
Publicly funded and a reliable partner for cable companies nationwide, it provides transparent coverage of local and state government, education, and public programming.
A digital town green that can be watched anywhere, anytime, and on any device.
Watch us on today's high-tech distribution methods.
Community TV in Connecticut.
Local,
unfiltered,
reliable, and yours. Follow us on Instagram at nutmeg.tv. Like us on Facebook. Search Nutmeg TV. Watch us on YouTube, Nutmeg TV, anywhere, anytime, on any device. Nutmeg TV, better programming for a better community.
And we're back with a group of residents who represent different areas in Connecticut, and some are retired, some are not retired, some are earning income while they're receiving benefits, and they have some questions for you, Congressman. Before we go to them, we just want to mention that 2/3 of beneficiaries that Social Security represents the majority of their income. 90% of them don't have any other savings. So this is a vital benefit that we're talking about here. We're going to start our questioning with James. James, do you have a question for the Congressman?
Congressman, thank you so very much for spending some time and explaining this issue to us. As we all know, the mother's milk of politics is money.
Yes.
I know that you are facing lobbyists that are investing millions of dollars against what you're doing. Could you explain a little bit about who they are and why they're doing what they're doing, and what the average citizen can do to offset that and help you?
I think the most important thing that average citizens can do all across this country, we're blessed in Connecticut that both United States senators and all 5 of the members of Congress are all supportive of Social Security 2100. Dick Blumenthal is one of the co-sponsors in the United States Senate as well. But it goes beyond that. To your point, this is a national effort. And even though the Republicans have said they like the proposal, no one has signed on to the bill yet. And in part because what they've tried to do is label the bill first as an entitlement. Well, we've pushed back so strongly on that I think they've given up the boat, because as we said in the interview earlier, you only have to look at your pay stub and understand what FICA means. That's federal insurance contribution. Whose? Yours. People know that. And so this is an insurance policy. They don't like to say that. It's social insurance, to be sure, but it's an insurance policy that's deducted out of your paycheck either weekly, biweekly, or monthly. And so it's the Congress's responsibility to make sure that it's actuarially sound, and it hasn't done so since 1983. So all the more reason and the sense of urgency for people to contact their member. And to your point, there are always people who are going to lobby on either side of the issue. And the best antidote for lobbying is the truth and exposure. and talking about this issue. All the polling data on our proposal to expand Social Security benefits and make sure they're solvent beyond into the next century is off the charts, minimally, and with Democrats, Republicans, and independent voters, because they understand the value of the program and know how necessary it is. So we just have to keep getting that word out there and insist upon a vote. Now in the House of Representatives, we do have a majority, and we will have the vote. That's not the case in the Senate. And so people are going to have to write to the senators, go online, go on the social media and talk about why aren't we taking this bill up? It's long overdue. Do your job as an elected member of Congress. And if you disagree with the benefits that are here or what we're asking for, well then fine. Come up with another proposal. Come up with one. If you prefer cutting programs, tell that to the people that you represent. Or do the right thing and cast a vote in favor of making sure that nobody can retire into poverty. There's a modest increase, that people who work shouldn't be continued to be taxed when they're elderly, and that the program is sustainable as required by law beyond 75 years.
Just one more follow-up, if I may, please. I have read and been told, and I don't know how accurate it is, but I hear that there are millions of people who are wealthy and do not need Social Security but collect it anyway.
Correct.
Is that true, and how do we address that, and what should we do about that?
Well, yes, it is true that people who are wealthy can collect Social Security because it's an insurance plan, and you paid into it. So if you paid for the insurance, there are some, and there is a manner in which they could decline and have those benefits turned back, but very few people do that. To be fair to a lot of wealthy people, whether it's Bill Gates or whether it's Warren Buffett,
yes,
they've said, hey, look, we don't need this benefit. We would gladly turn it back. But that in and of itself is not the fix for Social Security. And my own belief is that if you paid into the system, you're entitled to receive the money back. And do they need it? Well, probably not, but they paid into the system, and that's the fair thing to do.
Thank you. Let's go over to Elaine.
Yes, thank you for coming, Mr. Larson. I have a question about where the bill is now. Is it still in committee? Is it coming out of committee? What is the procedure to get your bill passed?
Well, it's a great question, and what we have committed to since taking over the House of Representatives majority is to return to regular order. What does that mean? That means that, as you were to look up in grammar school how a bill becomes law, it starts with the introduction of a bill, and then the bill has to go through a hearing process. We've already had 4 hearings, where in the last 8 years we've had none. And we're going to have probably a few more, and then we expect to vote first in the subcommittee sometime in June, and then by the July break, we hope to take it to the floor for a vote in the House of Representatives. So within the next 2 months, today being the 30th of May, we expect that this bill will both pass through the committee and the House of Representatives. And then the Senate will have to make a decision. Mitch McConnell and the Republicans control the Senate. Well, there's going to be an awful lot of pressure on them to take the bill up. But first and foremost, there hasn't been any discussion in 8 years. Now the conversation begins, and now the more people become aware of the very practical, pragmatic method of paying for Social Security and making sure that the benefits are there for future generations, including millennials, who will need it more than the baby boomers, we think that the time is right. And again, as I said earlier, we have a president that's predisposed to agree with the position that we've taken, and he could be a vital role in making sure as they negotiate with the Senate that the bill is taken up.
Thank you.
Is it true, Congressman, that only 218 votes are needed?
Correct.
Okay. And for the bill to become a law, both houses, and then the president has to affix his signature on that?
That is correct.
Okay. And if Congress does nothing, then the trust fund is expected to run dry in 2034.
And the disability side, and we didn't mention this earlier, what this bill also does is combine both so that we're no longer in a position, the disability portion is set to run out before 2034, probably in 2028 now. That's a very important life-saving entity within Social Security as well. We combine them and want to strengthen both so that there's no concern or worry that the United States government, and what makes this program as strong as it is it's the full faith and credit of the United States government. I gave a town hall at the Travelers yesterday, and insurance people understand this as well as anyone. There's no place in the public market where you can go out and buy a disability policy, a spousal, dependent coverage, and pension plan. There's nowhere for you to purchase that. You might be able to get an individual disability plan. You might be able to get an individual life insurance plan. You might be able to get a 401k, but you can't get one that's rolled in together and covers the entire country. Why? Because it's the full faith and credit of the United States government. Who's the United States government? We the people. What do we the people do? We paid into this insurance system. This is not an entitlement. It's the insurance you paid for. It's Americans taking care of one another. It's not Democrat. It's not Republican. It's not independent. It's Americans taking care of one another.
Now, we've heard that Social Security will be bankrupt, and I use that term in quotes because, in fact, we know that in 2034, it won't be bankrupt, but it will pay 79 cents for every dollar. And by 2092, only 74 cents for every dollar. So the ways to address this is now and either increase the revenue or reduce the scheduled benefit, which folks don't want to do. And Cindy, we're going to come to you because that is, I think, something that's on your mind as someone who's looking to retire in how many years?
It is. I'm part of the Generation X populace, and I'm, looking at my retirement. It's, coming up quicker than I want to admit, and my concern is, will there be any benefits left for me come time that I'm ready to retire?
Well, yes, there will be benefits. The question becomes, what shape are those benefits in?
Right.
And has Congress, have your elected representatives, and I can assure you that Joe Courtney is one of the leading supporters of this effort, have they been responsible in terms of making sure that this program is actuarially sound for future generations? And so that's why it requires us to act. You just heard the statistics. Even if we did nothing, it would still pay 79 cents, which is it's testimony to the kind of strength that this program has, and because it is the full faith and credit of the United States government. All it's required, hopefully, is people are backing away from A, calling this an entitlement, it is not, and B, that we have to fix it actuarially, not by diminishing people's opportunities. For many black men, they never even get the opportunity to collect on Social Security because of the mortality rate. And mortality rates, which in general have been on the rise, have fallen recently, primarily because of the opioid crisis in the country.
Yeah.
But even with all of that, the responsibility to make sure that this is there for every American citizen falls on the stewards of government, the United States Congress, to make sure the program does what the law requires. to make it actuarially sound, meaning sustainably solvent beyond 75 years. And we will in the House.
Now, Sydney, knowing that and hearing about this plan, if you were paying an extra 50 cents out of your pay, would that be something that you would be okay doing?
Oh, absolutely. Just reading the proposal, which I have, just knowing that it's only 50 cents would just be not a problem. You wouldn't even see it. So if, just the 50 cents.
Which is what most
paycheck.
economists and actuaries have said as well, and so did the chief actuary said, the brilliance of this plan is to do what they should have done in 83, which is index this, so it would be a slow increase, but it would keep pace and nobody would be there, oh my God, is this program going to be there for me? Yeah. So let's settle everybody in America down so that they know that the nation's premier insurance program is going to be there for them. But not just there for them, help everyone so that no fellow American who's worked and paid in their quarters and paid into the insurance system can fall into poverty.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
Rick represents the Real Estate Association and is a broker himself. And Rick, I know you have your own question, but I was curious about the millennial piece that we've talked about. Are you seeing in your industry that millennials are purchasing homes the way we purchased homes in our generation, or are you seeing that coming later for them for the reasons that we discussed?
Well, for the millennials, it is coming later. They're waiting a little bit longer to get into the market to buy their first home. The big concern that we see as realtors is a shift amongst the people that are buying homes. Like, for instance, in our state of Connecticut, as you are aware, it's a little bit more of an expensive state to live in than some of the other states. When you get to retirement age and you start to collect your Social Security, you start counting your nickels and dimes. And a lot of folks that I've dealt with over the years that have reached that age, they put their house on the market and they're leaving our state because they need to make those Social Security numbers stretch as much as they can. So they move to another state. My question is your proposal factors in a cost of living? Is that cost of living take into consideration any regionalization, like different costs in different states, or is it just flat for all over the United States?
No, it does take into, it would take into consideration different regions. But it would also, in terms of the cost of living in those regions. So when they're factoring the COLA, and this is an AARP proposal, when they're factoring the COLA and how they would determine what you're going to receive, the expenses they take from their formula are based on what you're actually paying for. So as I reeled off before, it would be, what it costs to heat and cool your home, what it costs in terms of doctor visits, prescription drugs, physical therapy, and nutrition, meaning the food that you take also. I believe they do have some transportation figure in there as well, but the idea here is that instead of taking the consumer price index, and as we were discussing earlier, and what workers are typically paying, et cetera, this looks at the population that is retired and on a fixed income and how that impacts them. So, and I think, we've had a huge bipartisan support on this, and credit to the AARP. They've done a great job of getting the message out on this. And between the Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare and Social Security Works and the AFL-CIO, all who have endorsed this plan, they all do so knowing that the COLA is a very important piece of this.
Excellent. And the second part of my question is I talk to a lot of people, and you've addressed where there's a concern about Social Security being there in the future. I'm fortunate enough to have 2 children. I have 5 grandchildren, and it's a conversation that comes up all the time. I'm just about ready to retire in the next 3 or 4 years. I'm in my 60s, as a lot of my friends are. And we know Social Security may be there for us, but what about my children? What about my grandchildren?
Well, the only way it won't be there is if Congress neglects it. Congress has a responsibility under the law to make sure that Social Security is sustainably solvent beyond 75 years. Congress hasn't done that in the past. This bill does it. And not only does it do it, but it also adds a number of the benefits, modest 2% across the board increase, making sure that no one can retire into poverty, having a COLA that actually reflects their needs, and also indexing and raising the threshold for taxes on an individual from $24,000 to $50,000 and on a married couple from $32,000 to $100,000, therefore giving about 12 million people a tax break. But making the program sound beyond 75 years. I believe that will include even your grandchildren. And it's up to future Congresses also to monitor it, and it's why on the Ways and Means Committee, we have one subcommittee devoted to nothing other than Social Security. And I'm honored to chair it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Let's go over to Bill. And Bill, as we told you earlier, is doing a lot of wonderful work, though he's retired, because it's important to stay active. He's very good at what he does. We enjoy the experience that retired workforce brings to us as employers. So, Bill, do you have a question on earnings?
Well, I actually have two questions. But my first question is, someone like me who's retired but enjoys working part-time, the income that I earn from my part-time work, I get penalized in Social Security, reduces my Social Security
You're right.
Pension amount. Has any thought been given to eliminating that penalty?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why that went into effect. First, back in 1983, and a lot of it had to do with where they saw the revenue come from. But in 1983, had they indexed this appropriately, we felt that that new level would be at 50 and 100,000. So, are you married?
No.
Okay, so if you're making, when this bill passes, and I believe it will, if you're making over $50,000, then the first dollar over $50,000 would then still be subject to a tax. Well, I didn't want to, guess, but most retirees are not, making that kind of money. But a married couple with combined income of over $32,000, we're taxing. A single person over $24,000, we're taxing. Doesn't make sense.
My second question, and please correct me if I'm wrong. It's my understanding that federal employees do not participate in the Social Security system.
No, that's wrong. They do.
Okay. Oh, they do? When did that go into effect?
That was the big fight in 1983, is to make sure that they were included. A lot of people say, oh, members of Congress don't pay Social Security. They do. Every, federal employees do. Where I think there's confusion is that it's commonly referred to WEP or GPO. And these are municipal employees in states who had collectively bargained to not they don't receive or don't have to pay Social Security payments, and therefore aren't receiving Social Security benefits. Here's the rub. For a lot of people, and being a former school teacher myself for 7 years, and working part-time during that because you couldn't live on the money you were making as a teacher, I don't get the benefit during that 7 years of my part-time contributions. And also, if you're married to somebody who worked in the private sector and you're a spouse of, you don't get the benefits that that person accrued. It's a very unfair law, and we're going to have separate proposals to deal with that. Now, it is true that since you were not paying into the system, that as a municipal or teacher, whatever the case may be of your employeeship, you may not get the full benefit, but you ought to get whatever quarters you were able to put in or your spouse was able to put in under the current arrangements of Social Security. Rich Neal, the chairman of the committee, has a separate bill on that again is bipartisanly supported, and we expect that we'll be taking that up by itself as well. But there was a time when government employees were not. They were exempted from paying Social Security. Interestingly, though, not members of Congress, though people think that amongst the many myths that we work for a day and we get our full pension. Ask my wife. I can assure you that that's not the case. We do pay taxes. We do pay into the Social Security and Medicare systems, and we do get a pension, but only after you've vested for a period of time, and far less than people might imagine.
I want to thank you for joining us, but we have to leave the viewers and all of us with some next steps, because there should be a place where we can go and either sign a petition or we can talk to our friends and neighbors, but to put pressure on those who are elected officials to move this forward. Suggestions?
Well, the power of the social media today is self-evident. I like to consider myself adept at the social media, but I must confess, I am not. My staff are, and that's where I think millennials can play such an important role as well as all citizens, by engaging and posting this, or if you're familiar with Facebook, put up your thoughts on Facebook and call for support of this. And talk about it in your various organizations, and whether they be church or whether they be the Rotary or the Elks Club or the Realtors Association. The more that people talk about common sense solutions where we can all come together. And again, I would say that this is not yes, Roosevelt was the author of it, but several presidents, including Eisenhower and Reagan, were very instrumental. Even Nixon were very instrumental in recognizing that this program needed to not only continue, but expand. And now it's Congress's responsibility, and I can assure you we're going to work very hard and put every bit of pressure that we can on getting this bill first through the House of Representatives and then on to the Senate, and then a signature of the president.
Well, thank you. And thank you for joining us here in Connecticut to talk about this. And we're going to have Congressman Larson's website on the screen so folks can go there for updated information. And for all of us at Nutmeg TV, thank you for watching.
Did you enjoy this program? Let us know. Contact us at 860-321-7405 or email us at nutmegtv@nutmegtv.org.